Hello everyone and welcome to This Nintendo Life. My name is NBZ. We're here at episode 77. If you put a 19 in front of that bar, that's the year of the original Star Wars coming out in theaters, which I think is a cool little thing. But yes, here we are, 77, another double digit back to back. But we're ready, we're good to go. It's all about Nintendo because that's the podcast this is about. And we're ready to talk. How are you doing, Bally?
I'm very good, NBZ. I feel like we're in that sort of final stretch of podcasting before the end of the year stuff.
I thought you were about to say before the NX and start like stoking fires that we have some insider information. But
it's just one of those things that's sitting over us. It feels like it could be in 5 years' time. It could be next week.
It could just come out. Nintendo never talks about it at all. Just doesn't mention it. So
it just comes out tomorrow.
Look, who fucking knows at this point? It's such a goddamn trap. Like, the internet just can't keep a hold of itself. It's horrible out there. It's like the front lines are just... People are going crazy, Bally. It's insanity. But in any case, we're still here. We're just going to talk about any video games. It doesn't have to be NX related, you know? We're just going to talk about things that we love doing, which is playing games. And I'm going to remind you, before we jump into the show proper, first of all, that I'm a little bit ill, so if you feel that my voice is different, it's because my nose is all blocked up and I'm trying to get through it, but we will continue to soldier on. But also, remind you, if you're watching this on YouTube, on the NBZ channel, this is going to be your last chance to jump over to the new This Nintendo Life channel, which I can now tell you can be found at a YouTube URL, youtube.com/ThisNintendoLife. We finally did it, Bally.
We did it.
It's wonderful.
We're YouTube famous now. It's done.
Apparently.
Sorted.
Yeah, exactly.
It's in the bag.
So it's all good and sorted, and hopefully all of you will go on over there. That's the new place where the podcast will be, and where we do a bunch of other things, let's plays and discussions and all that good stuff. So Bally, let's tell all the fine folks at home what we're going to be talking about this week.
As usual, we've got what we've been playing. We have some of your listener emails. And for our third segment, we thought, it's exactly 30 years since Metroid first came out. So we're going to have a little bit of a discussion about
I don't... Nintendo haven't really said anything.
Well, that's the thing. That's one of the points we're going to discuss.
Yeah.
So, people might not know it's the 30th anniversary of Metroid, but...
Yeah, maybe if Nintendo actually gave it the fucking light of day,
exactly.
people would care.
It's a series close to our hearts, so we wanted to shine the light.
Absolutely, shine the light. Is that Take That, Shine the Light? No, I don't know. There's probably a song.
It's the song that the UK last won Eurovision with.
Oh, great. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. There's your knowledge. Bally, the Eurovision expert.
I think it's Clarine and the Waves from 1997. There you go. Bit of trivia.
Jesus. Tell you what, Bally, when you put your mind to some memorization, it certainly happens. Oh, boy. All right, well, let's get into things, Bally. What have you been playing last couple of weeks?
I've been continuing the trend where we are aiming to beat every single Zelda before Breath of the Wild comes out, hopefully in March next year. And so I've now only got 2 more Zeldas to go. I've just beaten Oracle of Seasons.
Excellent.
So obviously I've got Oracle of Ages and Majora's Mask to go. So this game, it's really, really, really hard. It feels a lot more like Link's Awakening than I thought it would. Because this game came out 8 years after Link's Awakening, the original Link's Awakening. So obviously there was the DX sort of remake, but
right, the DX. I can't remember when the DX one came out.
I think it was near the launch of the Game Boy Color. So
yeah,
I can't remember.
I mean, that's the version we played because that's the one that's on Virtual Console.
Yeah. So I mean, the sprite designs look so similar. All the mechanics feel almost identical, like same engine, etc. They really do feel similar, even though Capcom works on the Oracle's games as well as Minish Cap. And it's weird because Minish Cap came out 3 years after the Oracle game. So the Oracle games are 2001, I think, and then Minish Cap is 2004. And Minish Cap just feels completely different to these games.
It's kind of crazy that you have this 8-year gap between Awakening and these games, and there's so little difference, and then the 3-year gap between these and Minish Cap, and there's light years of difference.
Yeah, exactly. Or I know it's 3D, but some stuff like Wind Waker came out just a couple of years after this game. So it's completely mind-boggling what the way that the series has evolved. One big reason why this game is so difficult is there are no bottles. There are actually no bottles. I'm not very good at generally collecting things in games. I often skip parts. I miss heart containers. If you're talking about Metroid, I miss energy tanks. I miss a lot of stuff because I generally tend to mainline, but occasionally I do kind of venture off the central path and do try to get side items. But I felt like I was trying to explore this world quite a lot and find the extra items and things, and I was like, there are no normally the first bottle or the first couple of bottles in Zelda games are really obvious, or they're given to you in some way, or it's that you don't have to explore too much to find them. And I was like maybe 4 or 5 hours into the game, a few dungeons in, and I was like, why have I not got a bottle? So that was a bit strange. And it's also strange because they're still like fairies that they look like they do in Link's Awakening, where they actually float around and you think, if I had a bottle to grab it, but you don't.
Yeah, I can't remember. Were there bottles in Link's Awakening? Because that's something that I don't even recall if that was a thing.
Good point. I can't even remember. I want to say there were. Maybe I'm wrong on that. I should check that out. But in replacement of the bottles, and they're not really a replacement, they're just sort of a side thing that this game does, are rings.
Right, yeah. I mean, rings are in both of the games. I've been playing a little bit of Ages, and I've basically been following along with a Let's Play from Nintendo Capri Sun, so I'm not really like going hard on it. I'm just like, every time an episode comes out, I'll just pop up my 3DS, and obviously save states help with that because I can just leave off where he leaves off on an episode.
Nice, yeah.
And I have noticed that like you do collect a bunch of these rings, and they seem to offer weird benefits, but you have to keep going back to this guy to change them and all that stuff. Yeah. So a little bit of annoyance in the usage, but it seems like there's going to be some probably quite powerful ones later on that'll change the way that you kind of use things.
Yeah, there definitely are. There are ones that boost like the power of your sword, but they benefit you in one way but reduce your ability in other ways. So the one that boosts your sword makes you take more damage when you get hit. And likewise, there's one that increases your defense but lowers your attack. So I didn't actually bother with those rings in the end because I just thought, you know what, I'd rather just be balanced. I'm accepting that I'm gonna take hits on big boss battles. I don't really want to be any weaker. That is not a good idea. So there are ups and downs. There are other ones that prevent you from getting hurt by electricity, that stop you getting sinking in quicksand. The one for sinking in quicksand I actually utilized on the sort of desert area in Seasons, and there's one part where you're actually meant to be sucked up by the quicksand and you're taken to a separate room, and I got a bit stuck because I never sunk because I was using a ring that prevented. So that was a bit of a silly loop, but they're interesting. Like you said, you can only carry one at the start of the game, then you can unlock a bit like wallets, you can unlock cases that allow you to carry more rings. So I got the case that got 3 rings. So you can equip 3 different rings. I got like 6 or 7 rings throughout the game, not too many. I didn't use them that much. I guess they're a nice thing for someone who wants to 100% the game, and speedrunners and all that who want the best rings to use at certain times. But it's an interesting area. It's not incredible. And that's the thing, is that this game, it's one of those things that's different to Link's Awakening, but beyond that, there's not massive amounts that are that different. I think this game really suffers from an issue I have with this game and Link's Awakening, and especially Link to the Past. And it's just it's the way that puzzles are done in dungeons, where you're wandering around the dungeon, loads of enemies that respawn in all the rooms, really tough enemies at points, and you're actually working out what to do in the dungeon between rooms. But the thing is, all you want is a bit of space just to work out what's going on, how to do the puzzle that might be between rooms or something. But the enemies keep respawning, so you just keep wandering around a bit aimlessly, trying to work out what's going on, taking on these enemies, and you're just gradually losing more and more and more health. And I mean, I used quite a lot of save states on situations like this where I'd just be racking up needless damage, and it was like, oh, this is annoying. So like, I mean, if I didn't have save states, I'd just go back to the start of the dungeon every time. And I think it's either you need to keep your puzzles in rooms that prevents enemies respawning, or you need to just stop enemies respawning necessarily so much so that you can just have some time to think about clearing the dungeons. And I think that the 3D Zeldas are perhaps a bit better in this, where it does feel a lot more like you clear out rooms and then you have time to work out what's going on in terms of the puzzle.
There's generally, I think, more linearity in 3D Zelda dungeons.
That's
obviously
true as well.
There are places where there's backtracking for sure, like you have Arbiter's Grounds and the Forest Temple from Ocarina, which are obviously very similar concepts, but there's a lot more leniency in terms of the enemies as well. Like, they're not complete crazy damage dealing things that you have to watch out for constantly. They don't really spam you with them. So I definitely think there's a distinction there.
As tough as I think the dungeons are, I think they're the best part of the game. I think I thought this with Link's Awakening as well. They're really good. Like, a lot of the design is strong. Like, this is almost, if you can ever get a sort of Zelda by the numbers, this is getting close to what that would be, especially if you're talking about a top-down Zelda. It's almost the opposite of the 3D Zeldas or a game like Wind Waker, where I care a lot more about the overworld and the towns and the exploring than I do about the dungeons. This game, the overworld just almost feels like an extension of the dungeons. It's like, you've obviously got you've got your Rod of Seasons, I think it's called, where you gain the power with the rod to change the seasons between the 4 seasons, and then the 4 seasons change aspects of the overworld that create some nice puzzles. So like the rod that turns it to winter makes like lakes freeze over, ice occur, and certain trees get cut down in winter, or in autumn there are these mushrooms that you can pick up, and there's those mechanics are nice, but ultimately, like I said, they're just an extension of dungeon puzzles.
Right, it's more like kind of wider scale puzzles to figure out where to go next.
Yeah, exactly. There's not a massive amount of towns. There's maybe 2 towns in the whole game, arguably 3 or 4 towns maybe. I just remembered a couple, but it's one of those things where the idea of reaching a new place, exploring the town, working out the issue, and getting to the dungeon, it's all quite systematic. And I think the game is ever so slightly too long. Like, I think there's 9 dungeons in the whole game. This game could have easily had 6 or 7, and I would have thought it was a meaty long game. Some of the later dungeons.
Yeah, I mean, going by the whole idea of paint by numbers, it certainly seems like, well, a Zelda game must have this number of dungeons, so we must do them all, even though this is a small cartridge and we've got to fit a lot in here. We've just got to make sure we can do it. And I think Ages is the same way. It's just like, we have 8 dungeons, we're going to do those, and maybe they will not all be very memorable. Like, because I think one of the things that I have an issue with, especially with the top-down Zeldas, is the reuse of tiles and assets being constantly again and again placed down in different places means that nothing is recognizable and nothing is memorable. So when you walk away from the game, you don't really think, oh, the 5th dungeon was great, because you're like, well, which one was that? I don't remember. I don't know what happened. Who was the boss? I beat him in 2 seconds. Like, there's a lot of that going on, where even after playing Link's Awakening earlier this year, only a few months ago, I can hardly remember any of that game. Like, it just doesn't come to mind in the same way that, you know, the Arbiter's Ground from Twilight Princess does, or, you know, the Deku Tree from Ocarina. Like, there is an iconic nature to a lot of the dungeons in the 3D Zeldas that 2D just can't compete with, just because of the nature of it, honestly.
Yeah, definitely. I think that a game like Link Between Worlds is a little bit stronger, quite a lot bit stronger than other, and Minish Cap. I think both those games do a lot more with the top-down formula of trying to make bosses and dungeons a bit more memorable. But I completely agree that the 3D ones are almost way out there by themselves. When you're talking Ocarina, Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, those dungeons and bosses especially just far more memorable. Probably my favorite weapon in this game. I never knew this was in the game, and it's a magnet. I don't know if you knew this was. That
is really weird, considering Breath of the Wild, right?
Oh, of course, never even thought about that.
Yeah.
So it's a magnet that you can change between south and north, and there are basically enemies and items that you can push and pull around the whole dungeon. And this item is used beyond just the dungeon you find it in. I think you find it in the 5th dungeon. Or maybe the 6th. See, that's the thing. You can't even remember this game. It's just all the dungeons merged together.
Exactly. As I was saying, here's my point in real time happening right now.
So this item is utilized a ton, but it's the boss where you get this item, which is really cool, and one of the hardest bosses. I really struggled with this boss, but there's basically in the boss room you've got the boss, and you've got a massive metal spiky ball, and your whole job is basically to line up yourself with the spiky ball and the boss and either push or pull the spiky ball into the boss to do damage. And that's the only way to do damage.
Basically an eclipse situation, right? With the sun and the moon between the earth and everything.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's just a really unique item that I really loved. And I think the game was quite good at using items from other dungeons in later dungeons together. So some of the longer later dungeons, you're definitely mixing up your items a bit more. I think the lack of variety of items isn't great. There's a lot of upgrading of items without giving you new items.
So far in ages, it definitely feels like they're just using the key Link's Awakening ones. And the thing that really pisses me off, which I think they could have easily got around, is the whole idea of the power grip being an item still. Because that should just be built into your character, and I still don't understand why it has to be an item. It makes item management such a pain in the ass, and considering 8 years on from Link's Awakening, you would have thought that they would have learned, but again, that's one of those things. Sometimes it comes down to, hey, this is tradition, and a lot of the times Nintendo games tend to be like, I'm going to keep the tradition even if it is a stupid thing to do.
Yeah. This game's got a lot of explaining to do when it's talking about moving the series forward, definitely, including reasons like that. But overall, this is a great, solid 2D top-down Zelda. If you like Link's Awakening, this is more of the same. Is it a better game than Link's Awakening? It's pretty much the same. It's that idea of, is Box Boy 2 better than Box Boy 1? Probably not. So you got to give more credit to the originality of the first game. So I'm still going to side more with Link's Awakening, I guess. But it's still a great game, and I think it's got a cool ending where obviously I'm now only halfway through a much more grand quest, you might say, and I quickly got the code from the end of the game, stuck it into Oracle of Ages, and I've started that game, and then I just saved and switched off just because I'm going to do that later. But
sure,
I've got that all ready to go, so I've got my same character, which is cool, so the story's sort of tied together, and I know a couple of things that happen later on somehow. I don't know, I looked something up online, but
okay.
It's interesting. I think it's a cool mechanic. It's a great game, and I look forward to Oracle of Ages. I'm a bit burned out on top-down Zelda for now, but definitely before Breath of the Wild comes out, I'm going to get on over to Majora's Mask and Oracle of Ages.
Okay, good
MBZ,
stuff. Well, yeah, as I mentioned, I've played a little bit of Ages, but it's not really significant enough to discuss, and obviously that'll probably take some time because I'm following along with a Let's Play, which is it's a weird thing doing that because, obviously a YouTube video has the elegance of editing, and so whenever the person who's playing does something and wants to skip through, they can just kind of cut to where they are, and I'm like, oh wait, I know where I need to go, but I've actually got to physically get over there as opposed to this edit just happening, so it's a little bit of pausing and stopping, but it's actually been a pretty fun experience, because I always remember people, and I think there's this one guy still with my Twilight Princess LP, who every time I post an episode gets out his Wii and starts playing along with me, which I always thought, the idea of the Let's Play is, hey, you play along with the person. I think that's been lost over the years. It's become much more of a, I'm just going to watch someone do this. So it's just been a weird, fun thing.
I never even thought about it like that. Let's play, the whole clues in the name. We're going to play this together. Let's
exactly.
Play. So I never even thought of it like
when
that.
I started watching Let's Plays back in 2009 or whatever it was, that was a big deal. A lot of people played along with the people. And over time, it's just kind of become this different thing, much more of a just entertainment-based, watching thing. But it was like a form of guide that was very unique back then. But obviously, aside from that, I've been playing every other game under the sun because that's my MO.
That's what MBZ does.
That's what I do. But obviously, last time I mentioned I bought a PS4, and obviously the game I had to play was Uncharted for the cap off to the series, A Thief's End, as it is known. And I'm just talk about that because I've played through the whole thing now. It took me 14 hours, so it's actually pretty lengthy. I think that's one of the interesting things about this Uncharted game is it feels very Last of Us influenced, not in terms of themes or in terms of anything like from that nature. Like it definitely has still the kind of jolly tone of the Uncharted series. It doesn't go too serious, but in terms of the areas that you're exploring being much more open and explorable, and you tend to find a lot off the beaten path in terms of collectibles, which, you know, that they're fine, they're not really anything to care about, but like there's a lot of like notes and pieces from journals that you can pick up, and kind of like side stories that are told through things that you find in the environment. And there's also like optional dialogue options, so if you go up to like this waterfall area or something, a triangle will pop up over the character who you're going to talk to, and you can choose whether or not you want to hear this extra kind of little bit of storytelling, which I appreciate. Gives you reward for kind of going around these areas, which is actually narrative based, and I don't think many games do that. You know, like if they're rewarding you for exploration, it's very much to find a knick-knack or a doodad that adds to some percentage meter. And while Uncharted does do that, I think the narrative carrot on the stick is much more exciting and great for people who enjoy that series, because that's kind of the core crux of Uncharted is like the story being told and these characters and the dialogue and everything. And like, in terms of that, I think it is the best in the industry. I don't think anyone comes close to Naughty Dog's level of motion capture and facial animation and dialogue between characters and just banter and writing. It's just so incredibly strong that you kind of look at everyone else and you're like, how are they doing this? It's kind of astonishing. And that's kind of where the strengths lie. And obviously Uncharted is, kind of a good adventure game, but it's never been so strong mechanically. I have felt, though, that throughout the combat, it was much more interesting this time around, because you have these stealth mechanics, which basically allow you to hide in grass and wait for enemies to come up to you. And when I first started playing, I was a little disappointed by it, because it was trying to give me the sense that Metal Gear Solid 5 gave me, but it doesn't give you quite as many tools as that game does to deal with situations and to make fun sandbox things happen. But as I went along, I started to appreciate it more, and it definitely made me feel like these encounters were much more dynamic, and they allowed me to kind of move around, and if I got caught by someone, I could still hide away and find a way to kind of diffuse the situation, so it didn't just blow out into a full-on firefight. I could kind of find a way to lose the enemy and then kind of go around stealthing again, which was great. Like, there are moments where in another Uncharted game, I would have just died because they would have overwhelmed me, but I was able to, like, multiple times within a single combat scenario hide and stealth and go back to what I was doing. So I thought that was really cool, and it definitely created some fun scenarios. I just think there's some great design in terms of the places where you're facing off against enemies. Like, usually, like, the first Uncharted game is very much, hey, here's a big open area and there are some boxes to hide behind, shoot people, right? Like, it doesn't feel like it's got a very much thought put into it. But in this game, you have these new mechanics where you have the stealth, but you also have this rope, which allows you to kind of latch onto places and swing across wide gaps, and you can basically jump on people from above with it. So you have a lot more variety in your approach, and so, like, any one combat scenario can go many different ways, which I just thought was a good way of injecting some life into it and making it feel much different than the others. That said, I still think I prefer, like, Rise of the Tomb Raider's combat, because you have many more weapons to deal with, and there's also the kind of the RPG element of the new Tomb Raider games, where you can upgrade your stuff and you can add, like, sights and things that make it feel more personalized, whereas Nate is just generally in Uncharted games just picking up enemy weapons he finds. So you never really get attached to anything. You kind of are going from thing to thing and just dealing with the situations as they come. But yeah, overall, I think that was an improvement. Like, and also I think the platforming has been improved somewhat. The expansiveness, the openness of the areas means that you have more approaches to choose how you get up to a place. Obviously, it's a single linear path, but, like, there are latches that some people might attach to and some people might not. Like, it gives you a little bit more variety, though it's still very basic. You still very much know what you need to do. Yeah, that stuff generally seemed pretty good. But, the things that people talk about with Naughty Dog games are the story and the visuals, because from a visual perspective, it's very impressive. I was kind of disappointed when I first started playing, because I was like, this doesn't look as good as everyone says it does, and that
You're
may
a
have been to
PC
do.
snob.
No, Bally, I'm not a PC snob.
You've played too much PC.
No, I just think that the way people were going on about how good this game looked, I just didn't really understand where that was coming from initially.
Because I'm sure many of those people haven't really played PC games a whole lot.
I disagree with that, because there are people like Brad Shoemaker. Although, to be fair, I feel like Brad, when he talks about games, kind of goes hyperbolic a lot of the time when he's into them. But people like Brad and like Jeff Bacala, who I know have played stuff on PC and have seen really good looking stuff, were just going crazy about how good it looked.
Taken in.
Yeah, a little bit perhaps. But maybe that was also to do with like the starting areas not being that impressive visually. Stuff definitely becomes better later on, but I don't think it's to do necessarily with like textures and resolution, because there's some rough stuff in there actually from my perspective. It's much more to do with the art design and the way that they craft like the way things look in the distance and you know, that's a strength of Nintendo is their art design, and they very much put a lot of they're not necessarily using power, but they're putting a lot of that creativity behind it. And I think Uncharted actually does a lot of that too, despite the fact that it's more realistic as a game. It's still very kind of, pulpy and adventure-y, and it still has a style to its art style.
I noticed I noticed you share an image on Twitter actually that it almost had what you've just described about the art style in one shot, where I think you could see a close-up surface that didn't look particularly nice, looked a bit grainy, but, not pixelated, that's too strong of a word, but it didn't look like a great texture. Sure. But within the same shot, you can see Drake and Nathan Drake, and you can see the huge expansive world at the same time, and you're right, that's definitely where it seems like this game shines.
It's one of those things that I think Xenoblade Chronicles did incredibly well.
Yeah, definitely.
That game looks pretty rough if you zoom in on stuff, but you look at the scope and the detail like in those environments, and you're like, holy shit, like this absolutely takes my breath away. So from that perspective, it absolutely... Yeah, it's impressive, for sure. The disappointing thing is it's 30 FPS, which, I can't really do anything about that, and it seems like
you're out of kilter with the rest of the world, maybe, on this
I'm not out of kilter with the rest of the world. It's that the priorities of the game market
you're out of kilter with the marketing world, let's say.
Right, the machine is, hey, we need these high-resolution screenshots to sell video games, and... that's the unfortunate part, is like they have to prioritize the high resolution because it's what is used to market it to the casual consumer, and the casual consumer is just like, oh my god, graphics, and they don't necessarily take any frame rate into consideration, which take it or leave it. But for me personally, it was disappointing, but it doesn't take away from it. I think it's still an excellent Uncharted game, and it has great moments. Like one of my favorite moments in the game is you're upstairs in your attic and you're kind of looking through your old adventures. Like you're going through Nathan Drake's house and you're kind of discovering like how they live and everything. And Kyle Bossman actually did an excellent episode of his show Bossman at Home, where he was talking about how real and how lived in that house felt. Towels on the floor and this laundry just messed up in the corner, and it just felt like an actual place that people were living in. But I think that upstairs area was really cool in the attic, because he's kind of going through these memories, and then he comes across this kind of plastic pop gun that shoots out table tennis balls. And he picks it up, and all of a sudden the music changes into combat mode, and Nate is just like hiding behind like books and stuff in his attic and pretending that he's out on an adventure, and like you can shoot these targets that are hung up in the attic, and it just brought this huge smile to my face, because it's like the start of the game is very much he's left that life behind, and he's kind of working a day job now, and he's kind of just maybe unsatisfied with things, and that kind of injection of like, hey, this is a tutorial to kind of teach you how to play, but also that idea of him just like in his own imagination toying around in the attic was so much fun. I just thought it was a wonderful way to just throw you into the game, and and great moments like that continue to happen. I think it's a really cool ending that leaves things on an interesting note. I'm not going to spoil it, of course, but I just think that they do a great job of tying things up, and everyone, all those characters get a good amount of spotlight. I think Some people have criticized the fact there's not enough Sully in the game, and Sully is like one of the main characters in the series who I think had a very big spotlight in Uncharted 3, so that's probably why he wasn't in it as much. But they introduce Sam Drake, who's Nate's brother, who's never been mentioned before, and they do a good job of justifying why that is. But I think they play off each other very well. Nolan North and Troy Baker are both excellent actors, and I really liked Sam by the end, and I think he's a very cool character that they've added to the universe. So, you know, if they go anywhere in the future, if in 10 years' time Naughty Dog come back and make another Uncharted game, or if Sony take the studio, I think, you know, they'd be good to take a break, and then...
I think they might do a spin-off in between.
No, I think like a reboot style thing would be cool. You know, like kind of how they've handled Tomb Raider, where, you know, there were spin-off and things over the years, but they came back live and kicking with this new kind of version. I think they leave the story in an interesting place where they could take that in the future. And yeah, I just generally, Naughty Dog are masters of certain crafts. They never make the best playing games, but I think they make such incredibly well-told stories, and that's kind of the peak there. It's something that you don't get from Nintendo, so it's one of those things that I think you know, it's very different from what, you know, you and I maybe usually play and talk about on the show. So
yeah, definitely, I'm tempted to pick up that trilogy and try.
Yeah,
it out on
I mean the
PS4.
trilogy's great because it plays at 60 FPS, Bally. Can you believe it?
Does it?
Yeah,
That's really weird. Okay.
Well, it's not weird because they're old games, so they can actually prioritize.
Yeah, it's
that
just
stuff.
it's just weird that they would run and then the new one they're like, oh, we'll make it 30.
Yeah, exactly. So, anyway, that's pretty much that. A great game, a great Uncharted game, and I would recommend it to people. It's one of the reasons to own a PS4. There's not many reasons to own a PS4, but it's one of them. So I guess I'll give it my recommendation. And yeah, that's all I'm going to talk about, I think, this time. Chipping away at Dragon Quest VII, almost at the end of Ace Attorney 6, Fire Emblem Fates Revelation in the background. I'm just playing 3 different 3DS
Good
games,
God.
Valley. I'm hopping, I'm jumping, I'm a
You're
frog.
playing a lot of long games. It's very impressive. I can never
Yeah.
play like multiple long games together. I always find that tough.
It's a bad idea. Don't do
It
it.
kind of is, yeah.
So,
So I looked at your backlog where I thought, ugh.
yeah, I don't know. I need a bit of spice of variety right now, so that's what I'm feeling.
Play something
so.
short. Just
I
hit
will.
it out of the park, you know.
I will. I got a lot of stuff on Steam to get through, so we'll do that. Also, a few more Humble Bundle games, so maybe pick up Sword and Soldiers or something in the meantime. But yeah, that's going to close us out for the first segment. Don't go anywhere, however, because we're going to be back after the break with some of your emails. It's been a little while since we did emails for the Earthbound Backlog Club last time, but we're diving back in, so be sure to stick around. We'll return momentarily.
Welcome back to the second part of the show. It is that time again. It is time for your emails. We've got a few in this week. We always need more, so I will tell you that email address. Again, it is ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That is ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. You know, we're getting into that end of the year section. There's a few things coming out. Who knows when this next news will drop? We'll see. So we love your speculation. We love your ideas, your thoughts, your comments, your criticisms. So get those into us. Our first email this week is from Ricardo, who's from Venezuela but now lives in the United States, which he mentions in his email. Hello, MBZ and Bally. I've been listening to your podcast since January. I've never written an email to you guys, but wanted to thank you for the great effort and the great podcast. Video games and Nintendo have always been a big part of my life. My family and I are very close, and playing video games, especially from the N64 era, always bring back good memories of them. Earlier this year, I was extremely busy working on my master's thesis for grad school. Being away from my family was extremely hard, but listening to your podcast in some sense felt like I was playing video games and spending time with them. In this email, I wanted to share one specific way that video games impacted my life. I was born and lived in Venezuela, but used to travel to the US for vacation about once a year, and now I live in the United States. One of the most memorable vacations was the year that my parents bought my siblings and I the N64 after months of begging them to get it for us. With the console, they also bought us a couple of games, one of which was Ocarina of Time. Later that day, I remember going back to the hotel. My brother and I told my parents that we had to test the console, controllers and games just in case they were not working properly. Even though my parents looked right through the lie, they still allowed us to connect and play the console that night. The first game we tested was Ocarina of Time, and that's all it took for me to become marked for life. That night we found the Sword and Shield and we ventured into the Great Deku Tree. While I truly believe Ocarina of Time is a masterpiece, the Deku Tree is the most amazing experience I've ever had in a video game. And now, almost 20 years after, there are very specific things like the smell of the hotel rooms that trigger the memory of my family and I sitting in a hotel room playing Ocarina of Time for the first time. I've always wondered if other people have similar stories about video games and their memories. Do you guys have that one game memory that every now and then comes back? Thank you for your time and keep up the great work. Sincerely, Ricardo.
Well, it's a very cool story to hear because I think like there's a lot of stuff back in the past which resonates with you from a nostalgic standpoint, and
yeah.
You know, there are games that we've played back in the day that maybe don't hold up anymore, but there is something intrinsically tied, I think especially with smell, that gets tied to a place in time. And I'm thinking, Bally, of the time we went back to our old school and we walked into the gym.
Oh my God, yeah.
And the smell of that place just brings you back to that moment more than anything else can. It's kind of astonishing, that power.
It was like multiple smells in different parts of the school as well, like the PE hall, and then this other one part, and then the chapel and things like that. They all had like their own distinctive smell that I clearly remember.
And over time, they'd stayed the same, which was kind of very cool. But yeah, Bally, both of us have stories of video game things that stuck with us that kind of had an impact on us. Do you want to kick things off?
Yeah, sure.
What's one that you kind of can recall?
For me, the biggest things I remember the most are console launches. I can so distinctly remember the Game Boy Advance launch, the DS launch, the Wii launch, the GameCube launch, and maybe not the launch necessarily because I didn't buy systems like the N64 and launch. I got them much, much later. But when I picked up those consoles, they were just so distinctive. The one that stands out for me the most, and you're in many of these stories, MBZ, of course. Is, the Wii launch. When I was like growing up and at school, and there were always these sort of great video games or systems coming out, I'd always like mentally prepare myself. I'd think, what do I have at school that I have to what hoop do I have to jump through before this comes out that I mentally have to get over before? Because, you know, if something's just a few days away, but you don't have to do anything very taxing, like an exam between now and when the game comes out, it feels like that time almost goes faster or it's a bit less stressful. I distinctly remember I had my GCSE art exam. So GCSE is like a 15-year-old exams. 15-year-old exams you do when you're 15 years old in the UK. And essentially, the unique thing about art exams and at my school was that they were across sessions. So these were 3.5 hour sessions across 5 days.
Sounds like a fucking nightmare.
It was a nightmare, I'll be honest. And the thing is that the Wii came out on the Friday. So I had these art sessions Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And it was just this mental goal to just get through these days. And I mean, I did well in the exam in the end, but oh my God, that like when I sat down to do the exam on Monday, I was like, there's 9.5 hours between me and the Wii. Like this is hell. Like, how do I do this? But that added pressure and that added, hoop to jump through meant that the sheer like joy I felt on the Friday when I finished that exam, and I looked around and everyone was like, oh, I'm so glad to get that exam off my chest. And I was like, yeah, me too, but I'm really excited for the Wii.
I'm more excited than any of you are.
Exactly. It was like two birds with one stone. It was like mentally finishing this crazy long art exam and finally getting the Wii. And
it's a hell of a catharsis.
Sorry?
Hell of a catharsis.
Such a catharsis. So I go to Ali T's house, and you also come to Ali T's house. He had the Wii with, obviously, Twilight Princess and Wii Sports, and you actually got a bit of a delay getting your Wii, but essentially it wasn't overly important because we were all just playing Ali T's on that night.
Right, at that time. I was really angry, though, because we hadn't pre-ordered one, and at that time, like, it didn't make any sense, really, back in the day to pre-order things. It just didn't... Like, there were obviously going to be loads, but this was a unique situation that had never been seen before. Like, the Wii was a ridiculous, like, out-the-gate success that kind of shocked everyone. And so, like, my thing didn't come until the next day, which was funnily enough, because the whole concept was... my mom had basically not put the order in, and then she was like, okay, I'll try and go to the store on the Saturday and see if I can get one. And I remember her picking me up from school and driving back, and she's like, nah, couldn't find one, I'm sorry. And I was just so fucking angry. Like, the rage had built up inside me, and I remember going upstairs. I can't remember if I've even told this story on the podcast, but going upstairs and I just fucking punching my pillow in rage, like fucking so angry. And I come downstairs and walk into the front room, and lo and behold, they basically trolled me because the Wii had been bought, and oh, fuck that. That was terrible. But I think it's very memorable because I was so, like, this pissed off teenager. Like, I just couldn't handle not having my fucking toy. What a privileged little asshole. But there you go.
Yeah.
Those are the memories, for sure.
Very quickly, there's another couple from me. I remember when I got the N64, I got it secondhand for £15, very, very late in the cycle. So this is like when Pokemon Stadium 2 came out, and Pokemon Snap and games like that around 2000, 2001. I actually had a television in the kitchen, and so in the evenings when I'd come home from school, I'd actually be playing my N64 in the kitchen. My mum would be like making food or making dinner and things, and then it would actually be quite a social experience where we'd like talk and things, and then actually when the Wii came out, for large periods of the first few months, the first year perhaps of when the Wii came out, I also had the Wii in the kitchen, and that was obviously really great for Wii Sports, where there was just a lot of room, and like when friends like yourself were around MBZ, it was just a lot better to play. So early on, I gaming was, specifically on these Nintendo systems, was a lot more social, and I'd always kind of, my parents would be a big part of that, and I'm an only child, so like my family's very small, and like so and getting home from school and talking with my parents while gaming was kind of a big thing, specifically with the N64 and the Wii at that stage.
Yeah. I think the other thing that really comes to mind for me is not a Nintendo console, but my first console, which was the PlayStation 1.
Blasphemy.
Which I received for Christmas one year. It was a Christmas where we had it in Scotland, which usually doesn't happen because all my family live in London, like my extended family. So we were always like usually down there, my grandparents or at one of my cousins' houses. But this year we were at home, and so everyone came up, and it was all this big deal. And as a result, like, it was easier for my parents to buy something big that they could give to me there without having the hassle of like having it in London and having to bringing it back up. So the PS1 was the first console that I got. Obviously, I had handhelds before, but like my dad had talked to people and figured out what was what, and had basically decided that PlayStation was the smart move. And you know, the conditions in the UK at the time and the way that the gaming market was going, Sony were definitely the more popular option than Nintendo. Like Nintendo has never been huge in the UK, and so like I feel like that's why he went down that route. And I got way more than I thought I was gonna get. Like the PS1 came and I had like 4 or 5 different games with it. Like I had no concept of money or anything at that time. Thinking back on it now, they spent a fucking lot of money on that PlayStation plus all those games, which was kind of astonishing. But I remember I got, I think, Mission Impossible. I had obviously Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, and then like a couple of other things. I think This Is Football 98, like
classics.
Lots of classic, clearly, PlayStation games. But the memory I remember is just like getting it hooked up on this really old TV we had, and me and my cousin sitting there, and me starting to play the Episode 1, The Phantom Menace game for the first time, and just being like, oh my god, this is amazing. Like, I have a lightsaber, I'm Obi-Wan with Qui-Gon Jinn, running around literally the first scene of Phantom Menace, which, you know, I fucking was in love with that film back then. So it was just this magical experience of, like, reliving the adventures of Star Wars in a video game that I just hadn't had that perspective on before. And obviously I had to get a memory card eventually because no one had bought one because we didn't know about that shit back then. But I had such a great time with me and my cousin just sitting there just like marveling at what this system could do, which was pretty special back in the day.
I think we have so many memories. We could spend a whole podcast segment going on about.
So maybe let's save them for another time.
Exactly, we'll save them, and like we've already said many stories, but we like bringing them up every now and then. So yeah, don't be scared to write in more emails asking questions about sort of gaming memories because we love talking about them.
Sure.
Our second email this week is from Rachel, who's from the internet. Hi, Bally and MBZ. I've been listening to the podcast for about 9 months now after getting into podcasts at the start of the year and searching Nintendo in iTunes, finding yours and liking what I heard. It is refreshing to hear a more grounded, independent viewpoint on Nintendo's affairs than the norm, and indeed from a British standpoint, while many focus on America, not to mention the correct pronunciation of the letter Z.
Yes, vindication.
Vindication. I've recently gone back through and listened to every episode of the podcast. Amongst my personal highlights are your pre-E3 segments, during which some of your predictions were wildly and in some cases embarrassingly inaccurate in light of what actually happened, and have provided a good laugh. This leads me on to my questions. With your podcast, what would you have had liked to have known when you started that you know now about how Nintendo, the games industry, has acted in that time? Similarly, what do you think Nintendo would have liked to have known about how this generation has gone when they launched the Wii U? The obvious answer would probably be surrounding mobile, I suppose, but would be interested to hear your thoughts on how their strategy would have changed, whether for hardware or games, amiibo, etc. Anyway, this email is already longer than I was expecting it to be, so thank you for reading it. And sorry for the too long / not good enough for the podcast. Either way, thank you for your work, and long may it continue.
Thank you, Rachel. I think we've been vindicated in renaming the podcast as ThisNintendoLife because she has clearly searched it in iTunes with the word Nintendo, and I feel like that might have helped, Bally. I don't know. It seems to be a good thing to do. But yeah, some very interesting questions there. Which one do you want to tackle first, Bally?
So we're talking about the podcast and like our sort of experience of going into the I don't know, what do you call it? I don't say games media. The
covering Nintendo, maybe. I don't know.
Covering Nintendo podcast.
Punditry
is the word I was looking for. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Okay. Well, my easy answer is I would not have liked to know anything. Because I think one of the most fun things about covering this industry and about covering Nintendo is you never know what is round the corner. Like, there are so many surprises that get sprung on you that you have to adapt to and figure out what the hell to do about. Like, when they announced the Breath of the Wild was delayed and it was going to be on NX and NX was coming out in March 2017, that whole situation was like, man, we need to react to this right now and talk about the ramifications and what it's going to mean and what the hell we're going to talk about for the next year, because clearly Nintendo's timeline has changed. Like, moments like that make me very happy to be covering and talking about this stuff because it's always dynamic, and I think that knowing stuff beforehand changes that perspective, and I think like it's much more fun to kind of jump into it and kind of garner what you can from the given situations at the time.
Yeah, definitely. I think generally just maybe going with so obviously we've got the Twitter account, the YouTube channel, and we're now called ThisNintendoLife. We were originally called Now You're Playing with Pat. I think if we'd just been ThisNintendoLife, had the YouTube channel and the Twitter account from the beginning, we'd obviously probably be slightly bigger than we are now. But those are sort of things that we've learned and thought, actually, that's a good idea to do. Let's actually try that. And like we said when launching the YouTube channel, like with all this news, especially with the NX, it's a great source to stay hot on the news. So obviously we're providing the long form, roughly 90-minute podcast every 2 weeks. But then the YouTube channel is really good for when news is hot and we can get videos out quickly, quick turnaround, tweet about them on the Twitter account, but then also still provide, hopefully, that news, those segments in the longer form podcast, or in special circumstances, stick it in both feeds. And I think it's great that we have that flexibility. And like you said, when that Zelda news broke and the NX was delayed, and it was just like the sky had fallen, and being like within Nintendo punditry, you're right, it's so important that we were quick on it. We got our opinions out there. And it was just really enjoyable to see how people were reacting, and especially, the Twitter sphere, NeoGAF, and places like that. It's just really exciting. And I think that before starting podcasting, I was maybe a bit naive about how important it was to be on top of the news, including when it's breaking. And just from being on top of news for so long, I feel like I've learned so much about the games industry, and especially Nintendo, both from playing Nintendo video games going way back, but also just staying on top of the news. Like, I think it's helped providing the content we've put out on the podcast. I said the word content. Can you believe it?
Oh, no, don't. No.
Put out the stuff that we do on the podcast, and now the YouTube channel.
Yeah, I do think that you also need to be able to sift through what is relevant news and what is you shouldn't be talking about. Like when Nintendo announced a new line of amiibos, like, okay, there's a subset of people who care about that, but it's not something that we should spend time covering, right? And I think we spend our time best covering the stuff that is important and relevant to more people, and also just kind of diving into other topics because it helps kind of broaden perspective.
I think part of the show that people may be unaware of some of the thinking that goes into it is often the third segment. So every 2 weeks, we always have a discussion about like what could be the third segment. And we've always got sort of ideas lined up, and we shuffle the pack, you might say. And obviously sometimes when news breaks, there's only one thing that's ever going to be in that third segment. But that's a real gray area where we do always discuss and have to. It's like it's pitching. Like I'm constantly pitching ideas to MBZ, and he's constantly pitching ideas to me,
and I'm shooting you down.
And shooting me down loads of times, and that's important because ultimately we both want the most relevant and interesting. I'm gonna say content. I don't want to say content.
No, topics, discussions,
we want the most
analysis, critique. Look, Bally, vocabulary, thesaurus. Get on.
We want the most interesting analysis, discussions in that third segment, and we're often hot on our heels to make sure we're keeping each other in check to make sure it's as good as it can be.
Totally. Should we address the second question?
Sure.
What do you think Nintendo would have liked to have known about how this generation has gone? I think they would have liked to have known that the Wii name is not as strong a brand as they thought it was.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Maybe it was. Maybe it is a decently strong brand, but I think it was a brand that was associated with a single product and a time and place. And when you think about how they positioned the Wii and the people who bought it, it very much felt like a toy. In the sense that they would buy it, only have Wii Sports, and only use it for that single thing. And so it became like an individual product that stood on its own. And I don't think people who bought the Wii on a wide scale understood that this was one console in Nintendo's lineage and that they were going to continue to go on to create more consoles after that, right? So it definitely felt like they were crutching on something and feeling like they could just take it forward, and ultimately, like, they messed up with the name itself, but just utilizing Wii in the first place, I think, was a misstep, and one that they could have, remedied pretty easily. But of course, how are you going to know that, like, this brand, which has sold 100 million units, is going to be diluted so fast?
I completely agree, and it's you're right. It's beyond the name; it's the brand. Like, the whole system's white. Obviously, it was sold in black as well, but the main one advertised was white. It was just a bit confusing. I think in line with that, had they known how far the Wii brand had sunk, I think they would have been as drastic as to say, you know what, this home console market for us is tough, and I think they would have taken the rumored idea for the NX when we're talking about hybrid console and handheld and done it a lot earlier.
Right, so basically jumped a generation.
Precisely. If they could have had, like, the strength of the handheld market has, while it's been, you can argue, maybe been falling to mobile slightly since the Game Boy to DS to 3DS, it's still really strong, and that's obviously the big selling point behind the rumored NX hybrid. But I think had that idea come out way back in 2011-12, they might be in a much better place right now. And I think they would have just been interested to have known how they can't get away with just releasing a Nintendo home console and expect enough Nintendo fans to make a successful console. It takes a much wider reach than that.
Yeah, totally. It definitely would have benefited them to kind of not have... I mean, the 3DS was successful, but if they had seen the way the market was going a little earlier and kind of maybe cut that tie and had this new thing which was both in one, and then you would have been able to kind of inflate your numbers by just having all under one banner, it definitely would have helped them, and they probably would have liked to know that. Trying to think of other things that would have been important. Like, I think maybe the image that they are perceived as by, a wider market, like the idea that they were very quickly losing this kind of younger audience that were going towards, phones and tablets and that kind of thing. I think that maybe trying to address that stuff and getting stuff... I don't know if I would say getting stuff on mobile earlier necessarily, because that there are ways that could have led them potentially if they'd taken the wrong lessons at that time. But definitely, like, figuring out ways to attract the younger audience that's not necessarily tied to just their platform. Yeah,
definitely. And that whole mobile thing could be a whole discussion in and of itself, but how much are they eating their own tail the earlier they put something like a Mario Run out there? I mean,
exactly.
Like, I think they were sort of almost evidently they were sitting back and are quite late to the party when it comes to mobile. I guess they were probably hoping, it's just going to be a fad, mobile gaming's going to vanish. And in many ways it is very faddy, but not quite in that sense.
It's faddy in the sense that the people who play those games flit from experience to experience, and they never really stick with one thing or have any faithfulness to one thing.
In the sense that it's still here and has been for a number of years. So
totally, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. But I guess this all leads into the next question to some part.
Okay.
Our final question is from Kevin S., who's also from the internet. Hello, MBZ and Bally. Now that the heavily rumored NX is a console handheld hybrid, what previously handheld exclusives are you looking forward to making the jump to NX, quality, graphics, processing power-wise? These would be series like Pokemon, Fire Emblem, Phoenix Wright, etc. I have a huge amount of nostalgia for Pokemon Colosseum on the GameCube and look forward to finally having another console Pokemon game to play. Keep up the good work. You guys keep me entertained on my commute to university every week. Cheers, Kevin.
Thanks, Kevin, for the question. Kevin's always great on Twitter, back and forth. Love having him sending stuff in. And Bally, I think we've obviously discussed a lot of the potentiality of how series could change being on NX with the handheld and console divide. But I think he brings up a series which actually strikes me in a way that is kind of surprising, is Phoenix Wright.
Phoenix Wright.
Because when I look at those games, they very much are still in the format that they were during the DS era, or even the GBA era when they first came out, which is very kind of much static images on screen. Not static, I should say. Very well animated, but there's not a lot of full-on movement going on. It's very much going from interstitial to interstitial, and I think that if you were to put a bunch of money and stuff behind that, it could be really cool. Like, you could imagine some really dynamic cutscene stuff with movement back and forth and more direct interaction between the characters, and maybe making the whole investigation sequences, I don't know, a third person kind of behind the back camera sort of walking around type thing. But then you also have to step back and think, well, wait a second, Capcom are not going to put that much money behind a product or a project like that because it's not going to sell these big numbers, right? So as much as we would like to imagine these great things that could be done with these handheld franchises, maybe we need to take the perspective that they were handheld franchises to begin with for a reason, and that their budget was such for a reason. So maybe putting a big heft behind a big blown Phoenix Wright thing wouldn't make as much sense. Now, I'd say that you could argue differently for something like Pokemon, because it is a much larger franchise which does sell huge number of units. But I don't know. I think like I'd have to look across a broad range of handheld games to kind of make that decision as and when. How do you feel about it, Bally?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It is something we've discussed briefly before. Just randomly, I noticed Emily Rogers' tweet, and I completely agree. Like, the second you have Pokemon on a system, it's going to sell 30 million. Like, that was her rough estimate. That she just basically sort of said, look, the second it's there, it's going to be like that. And I think in and of that sense, once you start talking about them changing up the formula in some way, because it's on NX versus purely handheld, I think you're into dangerous territory, because you're right, like the life cycle and production cycle of handheld games is very specific, and it is often shorter because the number of assets are different and a load of reasons. But essentially, if everything just becomes AAA, it just slows down the production process, and you're not going to see as many games.
Right.
For me personally, handheld games I like. I don't know, because so many handheld games that I do really like, especially from sort of the Game Boy Advance era, 2D Metroid, F-Zero, games like that. I mean, imagine if F-Zero and 2D Metroid come out on NX. First of all, that's incredible. But those were already, Super Nintendo experiences that were brought onto the handheld. So same with Link to the Past, like that top-down Zelda. These all started on the home console. It is series like Phoenix Wright, Professor Layton, perhaps, that
Layton totally
are much newer franchises that did start on handheld. And yeah, I'd be interested to start Phoenix Wright or Professor Layton or something like that on the NX. I think that'd be really cool.
Yes, but like again, it just doesn't make sense for them to funnel money into it, because it's not going to be a big seller. And I think you like looking at all these 3DS games, I'm going through them, and like so many of them are games that are basically shrunk down versions of console games already. So at that point, you don't really have a individual handheld identity for them. Like, you think about things like Mario Kart 7, which, I mean, that game is basically like, it's so similar to Mario Kart 8, and you have things like, I don't know, freaking Animal Crossing, which is kind of the same across both platforms. You have Luigi's Mansion 2, which could have been done on a console, maybe improved in some ways, like made more expansive, but ultimately I look at the 3DS library and I see so many games which could have been console games anyway. They're just shrunk down and have, a lower budget and obviously are kind of like paired for the system. So yeah, when I do think about NX, it's like, well, I don't know if they're ultimately going to change that much, because there are so few games out there that were originally handheld that can be transformed in a way to be like home console experiences.
But you still think Phoenix Wright, Perez Layton will come out on NX? You're just saying...
Yeah, totally. I think they will.
They're not going to change the formula just because it's on NX.
No, totally. Like, they may look nicer because there's, better hardware going on, but those games sell well and do well for a reason, and I don't think improving graphic fidelity and adding extraneous features that don't necessarily improve the gameplay itself is going to do anything to further that cause. So it just wouldn't make sense financially, so.
Yeah, and it's a weird one. We don't even know for sure if the NX is going to be a hybrid, but
the Pokemon Company guy basically said it badly, so I think we can, at this point, I think we can drop the pretense. I think everyone kind of assumes that is what it is, but, who knows? Let's be fair. Nintendo are fucking crazy. They could just scrap the idea tomorrow and be like, no, it's a fucking dishwasher that you fucking spin around in like a hamster. I don't know.
And I think ultimately, we've always been hinting at it with this conversation, is that it's just a growing and growing grey area between handheld and console, and that almost just plays in perfectly to what the NX is going to be. It's just
exactly.
It's
like as we were saying with the 3DS library, you look at it and you're like, okay, this game is on 3DS and Wii U basically. Like Smash Brothers is here, Mario Kart is here, Animal Crossing is here, like. All these franchises are basically the same thing, but they're having to make two versions right now because they have to serve two markets. And if they have to serve one market, guess what? They can spend more time not making another Mario Kart, but maybe they could spend time making another Mario Kart, but this time not be so conservative and maybe go bold and do something different. And that's actually a more exciting prospect is maybe getting multiple of these games per cycle, but one of them being conservative and the other one being more out there and doing different things and kind of reusing assets but going in bold directions.
And it's interesting because taking a few, I'm just looking at my 3DS games now as well, and taking like a couple of games that were very distinctively handheld, like Gunman Clive or Pushmo. These are games that came to the Wii U in their own forms anyway.
Right.
So, Pushmo World, the Gunman Clive HD collection, those are games that work so well handheld, and you could argue are a bit strange being on a home console, but ultimately they work, and people see beyond whether a game is, handheld or home console. They just want to play good games.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, I think the whole speculation about like maybe improving the power for these games has games in which it could be potentially applied to, but I think it's more likely that they're just going to be conservative with it. So there you go.
So that's all our emails this week. We are always running low. We really are. If you'd like to send in an email, please send it to ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That is ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. Please send them in. We love reading them. And it's a good part of the show, the email segment. I enjoy
Absolutely.
it. It's good. So catch us after this quick break where we will be discussing the 30th anniversary of Metroid.
Alright everyone, welcome back to the third and final part of the show. I'm MBZ, as always. Still here. I didn't go anywhere, don't worry, didn't run off. No? May have felt like I needed to disappear, but guess what? I'm not Metroid, so I didn't disappear. Bally, what are we talking about this segment?
I thought we'd talk about the Metroid 30th anniversary, seeing as Nintendo haven't.
They never do, because they don't care. Because they have no love, they have no joy in their hearts. Samus Aran is merely a name etched onto the walls by someone in Nintendo.
Do you think people at Nintendo even know who she is anymore?
No, I feel like there's this dusty painting of Samus, like, sitting like under Reggie's desk, like, and sometimes he accidentally kicks it, and then one day he like stubs his toe on it. He's like, "Oh fuck you, Samus! What are you doing here? You're such a pain in my ass, and you're never gonna sell any copies. I need money. I'm Reggie. I need to make some of the mullah. Give it rain down from the skies on me." I just imagine Reggie's like showering in money. That's how I feel like Reggie is portrayed generally. He is a businessman, like he loves it. He just licks it up. So anyway, that's Reggie. That's a great image for your mind. I hope you're enjoying that one right now. But yeah, let's talk about what's going on with Nintendo and Metroid right now. Federation Force obviously came out. It was a dismal failure, I think, to put it like lightly. To be quite frank, there, I believe it sold so badly that it didn't even crack like the top 50 in North America or something stupid like that. It was like you had to go really far down the charts to even find where it was. And obviously, we knew this was going to happen. That was an enormous fan backlash. People were angry about it, and I wonder about it. What are the messages that Nintendo take away from this, if any? Can they take messages away from this? Can they take the message away that a normal Metroid game will actually sell well because there's a fervor around it, or is this a vocal minority who are just making themselves known because they're so angry?
I think it's really dangerous to take away anything from it, and yes, it is a vocal minority who definitely spoke out against it, but I feel like with a series like Metroid, you need the vocal minority to be on side, because as we know, Metroid generally doesn't sell very well, and if the hardcore Nintendo fans aren't enjoying it, then it's not really appealing to anyone, because it's not hitting that market of people that maybe buy 1 or 2 games a year, who play Nintendo systems a bit more casually. So the fact that Federation Force couldn't even win over Metroid fans, it meant it just failed at the first hurdle.
So do you think then that the lesson Nintendo might take away from this is, well, a Metroid game didn't do well, why would we put more money into another Metroid game? Or do you think they have the common sense enough to step back from it and realize that this is a distinct product, and the reason it sold badly and did so poorly was because the lack of it being an actual Metroid?
Yeah, I do have faith in Nintendo to accept that they are able to listen to fans and say, right, oh, you like this about the Metroid series? I think that they're open to trying things that are new with series, but then if those aren't successful, going back to basics. Like, I think that I'm trying to make a Zelda comparison. I mean, that I think the Spirit Tracks and Phantom Hourglass may be an area where they tried something new and it worked for a period of time, but ultimately, even though the 3DS had a touchscreen, and they didn't want to go back to touchscreen controls, they went back to basics. So I think that they know they're always prepared to experiment, but I think they're also always prepared to go back to basics. So I don't think that writes off them doing another Metroid game that's more traditional. I think they can't learn too much from Federation Force, but they can learn, right, that was an experiment, wasn't great, let's go back to basics and do something more standard.
So in that sense, then, we need to imagine what would Nintendo want to do with Metroid in the future. I think we've seen with many of their franchises that they kind of go back and forth depending on the success of it, right? Like, you see the success of something like 2D Mario and Animal Crossing and Pokemon, and those are games where they iterate incredibly little between entries because they have a formula that they know is successful and that they know people will buy regardless. So in that way, they're never afraid to put out yet another sequel because they're always guaranteed to make money off it, and they're always guaranteed that it's going to be a critical success and people are going to love it. when it comes to other franchises such as your F-Zeros, your Star Foxes, and your Metroids, they don't sell as well. They're not as well known by the wider audience. They are not, therefore, put in the limelight. And as a result, Nintendo always feel that every time they release one of these games, they have to have something new. They have to change something up, do something different, make some sort of innovation, and maybe that's something that could be problematic for Metroid in the future. Do you worry, Bally, that they are not going to just go back to a bog standard formula for Metroid and try something really weird and then risk a lot of people hating it like people did with Star Fox Zero?
It's a tough one, and I almost think Federation Force gives them a free pass to go back to something as bog standard as possible, like, you know, Metroid Prime 4, for example. I think that if a Metroid Prime 4 came out, had many of the same mechanics and ideas of the Prime trilogy, and looked great on, say, the NX, I think people would be like, great, that's a great Metroid game. I think they would then be under pressure after that game to try and innovate more, but I think because of Federation Force, the backlash against innovation is probably going to be very strong. People want a safe Metroid game, whether that's 2D or 3D. It'd be crazy if they say, all right, and here's this NX game, it's a Metroid game, there's nothing like you've ever seen before, and they try and do like a Federation Force, or, you know, what was the Wii game you loved that is a bit weird?
Other M.
Other M, of course. I don't think you're going to get in the realm of Other M or Federation Force for NX. You're going to get something 3D or 2D, and they're going to try and stick to the formula, I hope. And I think it would make sense for them to do that.
It would make sense, but then we know that Nintendo goes against logic so often that it kind of defies belief. Like, the thing that makes me fearful that they would go off in some weird direction and try and create whatever they call innovative with Metroid is the same thing that we have with the Paper Mario series right now, where people really badly criticize Sticker Star and were like, this is not a very good system. Why would you have turn-based battles in an RPG which isn't an RPG, where you don't gain experience and it all seems like a waste of time, and yet they double down on it? Like, Color Splash is literally that game again, but even more like clunky in that department, making it even worse to get through battles and all that shit. So I just feel that there is definitely a danger of them going down this weird road and being like, okay, well, Metroid Other M like had problems, but maybe let's take Other M again and try and do that somewhat differently. Which, I don't know. I feel like that's gonna spell some kind of death sentence. But
yeah, definitely. I
don't know.
It's a really tricky one, and I think another big factor is who's going to work on the next Metroid game. Like, if it's
right.
Is Retro really going to work on a Prime 4? Is that just a rumor, or is that something that's actually potentially possible? I think that makes a huge difference as to where they go next. And if you take the Prime trilogy, obviously I've not played the third game in the trilogy, but that's a very unusual thing for Nintendo to do, where they make a trilogy of games that, broadly speaking, all are around the same idea and same format. Obviously, those games differ quite drastically in terms of stuff like the Dark World and Metroid Prime 2, but ultimately those are very structurally similar games, and Nintendo don't really do that. So it would be a good excuse if a Prime 4 did come along and they could say, right, we're making Prime 4, all the Prime games. I mean, the fact they used the Prime name in Federation Force is extra cheeky, but the Prime trilogy and that Prime series on GameCube and Wii, that's just so crucial that it's an identity that a Prime 4 could do and be successful with, you would think.
Yeah, I don't know whether they will double down on going that route, or whether with NX potentially having that handheld component, whether it makes more sense for them to be more traditional and maybe create a 2D Metroid that is more AAA in its aesthetic.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, there are indie games out there which have really nice looks to them that look like, in a sense, AAA kind of Metroid-style games. I think Ori and the Blind Forest is my standout, where you look at it and you're like, that is a game that has a good budget behind it, but it's made by a smaller studio, and it feels like it's worth a lot, despite it being a 2D game. And I think that's one issue generally that Nintendo have had, is like through the Wii generation, their resurgence of 2D platformers and all this stuff, I think the general public, when they look at a game that is from that perspective, feel like it's not worth as much anymore in this world of big open worlds and 3D and all that stuff, you know? So I think that is a challenge that they have to get past, is like, how do we make this a full product despite it just being this 2D kind of adventure going on?
I think a huge part of the 2D series is that they've not actually done a 2D game since it was sprite based. Like, we've not actually had a 2D Metroid that's rendered in that 3D style that they've done for, you know, stuff like New Super Mario Brothers, and that is strange when you think about it, because that was rumored for right back at the start of the DS life cycle.
Absolutely, Dread. Never
Exactly,
forget.
and the fact that they went for a 3D Metroid on DS with Prime Hunters, that was a strange decision in and of itself. And, you know, if we do get to NX, it's crying out for just doing a 2D Metroid. It's very difficult to try and persuade Nintendo to do a game by the numbers, but that's essentially what everyone is crying out for. So, and like you said, Nintendo's so unpredictable.
Well, I don't think it's difficult for them to do a game by the numbers generally when you have those series like New Super Mario Brothers, but trying to persuade them to do something bog standard with the Metroid franchise is the problem here, I think. Although, having said that, like when we look at Nintendo's stuff recently, they have been making a real big nostalgia play. So if we're to go along those same lines, and if they're going to market the NX from a very nostalgic standpoint, having a 2D Metroid actually makes more sense than a 3D one.
Or even if they do something like they did with Link Between Worlds and remade Super Metroid in a new engine or something that harkens back to, you know, like we're saying, them playing on them retro feels and getting people excited about a remake of a game like Super Metroid, which everyone loves. It would be fantastic.
I wouldn't rule out a Super Metroid 2, you know, like if they did the similar thing to Link Between Worlds, where they're keeping it in the same kind of area but changing up where things are and how, you know, having different bosses and maybe different power-ups and stuff. That sounds pretty appealing, actually, and it's a safe move, you know. It's not a risky one, because they know that the name of that classic is going to be able to be bankable in that sense.
And obviously, with Nintendo being so slow to come out with another 2D Metroid, a huge vacuum has been created. And in that vacuum, there have been an incredible wealth of Metroidvania games. Some incredible ones, like you were saying, Ori and the Blind Forest. We can talk about Axiom Verge. The list goes on and on and on of like incredible Metroidvania games. How do Nintendo put themselves in a position where they don't look like they're just copying those other games' ideas and can actually still be innovative within a series that obviously they created?
Yeah, it's really hard. In a sense, like, I think a lot of people would just be like, I don't care. And I think the release of AM2R, the Metroid 2 remake, has really shown everyone that you kind of don't need to reinvent the wheel. Like, Metroid is so unique, I think, because of a lot of the abilities that you have, like the movement options, right? So things like the screw attack and the space jump combined together is such a uniquely Metroid thing, and no other indie kind of Metroidvania has actually ripped that off. They've all got their own power-ups and their own kind of things that go along with the worlds that they've created, but those movement options are just so diverse and different that Nintendo just coming back and being like, okay, we're going to give you what we've done before, but maybe clean it up and make things a little different, could still make an impact because it's been so long.
Do you think Nintendo have missed a beat by not talking about the 30th anniversary, or is it just simply they had nothing to say? If they did have a more a Metro game coming out in 2016 that was more exciting than Federation Force, would they be shouting 30th anniversary from the rooftops?
No, because Zelda also has the 30th anniversary in the same year. And when you put those two franchises up against each other, it's clear which one Nintendo has the favorite child of, right? Like, you think back to the 25th anniversary with Skyward Sword and the concerts and all this other stuff. I think Ocarina 3D came out that year as well. Like, that was also the 25th anniversary of Metroid. What did we get? Nothing. Like, it was the year after Other M had come out, and people were very sour on what had just happened, and it just didn't seem like a good time to celebrate. But also, like, when you're going up against a franchise like Zelda, which is probably the most similar to Metroid in terms of gameplay and is way more successful, I just don't see what Nintendo benefits from shouting from the rooftops about it, because it's very clear that the fan base for this series is much more niche and hardcore, and when they know about stuff, they'll know about it. Like, they don't need to maybe make it a bigger deal, because I think there are other franchises, like everyone says Mario, Metroid, Zelda, those are the three core tenets of Nintendo. And sure, for the old school gamer, for the person who's really into Nintendo, from a gameplay perspective, those are the beacons. But when you're talking from a market perspective, Pokemon, Animal Crossing, Fire Emblem even at this point are bigger than Metroid.
Definitely.
So you've kind of lost that as a pillar in that way, which means it's not really worth talking about. But I don't know, Bally, is there a way they can innovate with Metroid? I don't know what you can do, because for me, that style of game is so incredibly solid as it is. I just feel like it's been perfected so many times over, and the only thing you can really do with that map design and everything is making things a surprise. I think that's one thing that Metroid games suffer from a lot of the time is you know what's up. You know what power-up is coming next. You know what's going to be on that room after you beat Ridley. Like, there are these familiar elements that pop up again and again, and I think breaking that cycle and making things surprising will be something that can help them refresh Metroid. I think they're doing it with Zelda right now. Like,
yes,
I don't know what the hell is out there in the world of Breath of the Wild. Can you imagine, like, coming across this new item in Metroid you've never heard of before, and it does this weird, crazy thing? Like, that's something that I would love to see that franchise implement, is to have that sense of discovery again, because I think that once Super Metroid's template was put into place, we all knew every Metroid game after that what was coming. Like, here's the screw attack, here's the speed boost, here's the missile, here's the super missile, here's the grapple hook. Like, they continued to just use the same things again and again and did very little deviation from it.
I think Zelda's a fantastic example where you look at the most recent Zeldas, look at Skyward Sword. I think some of the weapons in that game are unbelievably innovative. Obviously, a lot of them utilize the Wii motion controls, and that's a great platform where they were able to innovate. But then even you take another Zelda like Link Between Worlds, and it's got the core mechanic of going flat on the walls. That, while it's not like a single weapon, that's just a mechanic that changes the whole game. Can they come up with a mechanic in 2D Metroid that changes the whole game? I don't know what it would be, but I'm confident they could do it. I think a mechanic like the wall sidle would be cool. But on top of that, something like Skyward Sword with like a fresh range of innovative and different weapons, I think you could create something really exciting that people haven't maybe considered yet. But who knows? I mean, that's a really high barrier to set for this game. But the amount of time that they've set, and the fact that there are all these other great games in the Metroidvania realm that we've talked about, means that bar, the longer they wait, just keeps getting higher and higher and higher. And trying to challenge Nintendo to jump that bar each time is maybe not going to be their cup of tea. That might not be what they're wanting to do.
Yeah, it's a hard challenge to face for sure. And to be honest, not having any more 2D Metroids isn't a huge deal in 2016. Like, I've had my fill of all these types of games. And I said, like, I think last year that I wouldn't really care if Nintendo didn't make another 2D Metroid. But that's kind of a lie, because when I played AM2R, I was just struck by how at home I felt in it. Like, how much I love that formula when it is Samus and when it is her arsenal and you're just exploring and wandering around and going through those such well-designed environments. Like, I really think that I want to live in a world where there's more of that. And yeah, it's a very easy thing to ask for, but it just doesn't seem like it's something that's going to happen. I don't know. I feel very lost as a Metroid fan, Mally, and I'll still keep making the prediction of a new 2D Metroid every year for the rest of my life. Because if I don't and I lose hope, then the dream is dead.
I think,
and I don't want the dream to be dead.
I guess that leads to the next step. Now we know that there's going to be an NX reveal at some point between now and March. Who knows? It could be next week. It could be February. We don't know. Do Nintendo show off games in that reveal? And is one of those games a Metroid game?
I think if Nintendo want goodwill, Metroid is the franchise for goodwill. It's not going to make headlines for the majority of outlets, right? It's not going to be the thing that the mainstream people get behind and they're all like, oh, I need to buy this console because it has a Metroid on it. But if you want to instill confidence in a fan base, and if you want people to get excited, and if you want people to trust that Nintendo are back on a good track again, that the train has come back on the rails, then Metroid, I think, is probably the ultimate franchise for that. Because it has a greater appeal, I think, across the Nintendo fan than something like F-Zero does or Star Fox does. Those games generally, I think, tend to be more segmented because they're about racing and flying. So, for 100% certainty, I think that if they came out at an event, like an NX event, and said, hey, there's a Metroid game, people would be incredibly excited. So,
MBZ, what's the percentage chance of a Metroid game getting revealed at the NX reveal?
Oh, God. Now they're past Federation Force, they have an open window to talk about another product. And I think that was a big deal, was like just getting that thing out of the way so they don't have to worry about it anymore. I would say that I would put the percentage chance at 50. I think it's a flip of a coin. I think it's a flip of a coin kind of thing where they are always thinking, as they say, about new entries in franchises. And the reason I think Federation Force was created and put out is because they've wanted to fill the gaps where there aren't mainline entries every year. You know, like they have the big Zelda games, but they always keep putting out re-releases and spin-offs and all those different types of things to keep people having it in their conscience and knowing there's a Zelda product always like there for them. And so I think what they did with Federation Force was the bad move, which was to put out the spin-off product before you confirm that you're still working on like a mainline one. And as a result, I think that like there is a definite chance that Metroid is going to show up. The form it shows up in, I'm still completely like I can't even divine whether it will be something that we know and love or whether it will again be some deviation, but I have to go down the middle because I don't think that we can get any better chance than that. Like, yeah, I don't think. How about you? What do you think percentage wise?
I might go higher. I might go 75%. And
Man, that is bold.
It is very bold, but I mean, you know, we're all about the bold predictions here on this podcast.
The terrible predictions.
The terrible, obviously. Bold predictions. I just think that it would be. I know that Nintendo rarely try to get, you know, the internet hyped when it comes to NeoGAF and Twitter, perhaps. I mean, they do it on occasion, but what if they just said, you know what, stuff it. We're just going to try and get the internet as excited as possible with this NX reveal. I guess we'll see some more Breath of the Wild. Big deal. That'll be interesting. Great.
But then, don't say big deal about Breath of the Wild. I'm fucking stoked.
Of course I am, but I'm saying the footage that we would see of it running on NX isn't going to maybe excite you as much as E3 did with the reveal. That's all I'm saying. Like,
sure.
But if they then slid that into like, oh, and by the way, like we've also been working on this Metroid game that's going to be coming in the launch, and they'll say launch window. They'll never say the launch, but in case it gets pushed back, they'll say launch window, Metroid, blah. Here it is. And you know the internet will just explode. Like it's already exploding with the fact that this is the NX reveal, but then to just sweeten it with like Metroid. I mean, come on. I think there's a strong chance of that because they need some excitement. Will they try and say anything 30th anniversary related in that reveal? I highly doubt it because it'd be a bit random to announce a game on the back of an anniversary rather than ensuring that one comes out on an anniversary. I don't know, but yeah. I think it's going to happen. I think it's they need a bit of excitement around this series. And as much as we were joking about Reggie with his Samus around onto the desk, I think that it's maybe too rich to say that they do value Metroid, because if they valued it,
Reggie wore that pin on the game thing, the VGX, and then revealed Cranky Kong and Tropical Freeze. So
I think the question though is, does Reggie know the name of the person on the pin he wore, or was he just given it at last minute? Like, Reggie, you have to wear this. You just need to please the fans. He's like, okay, I don't know, but I'm quietly confident.
All right, Bally, you take that confidence. We'll see where it gets you, I guess.
It could be next week. It could be in 8 weeks. It's crazy times.
I'm giving up. I give up on this NX business. Bally.
It's weird.
I'm done. We're not talking about it anymore. We're not allowed to say the words NX on this podcast. I banned it. God, that's impossible. Anyway, I think that's probably going to close things out, Bally. Just a quick kind of chat about Metroid and our hopes and thoughts, and I don't know where it's going to go, but certainly always good to discuss, because it's near and dear to both of us. And I think that's going to wrap up the segment, which will also wrap up the show. So Bally, before we get on out here, Skadoodle, who boot, you give us the places you can be found on the internet.
I can obviously be found at Twitter. I'm at Ballyman91. That's BALLYMAN91. That is also my name on the Miiverse. I'm posting plenty about Fire Emblem Fates Conquest. I'm playing a bit of Star Fox Guard, doing a lot of Miiverse posts about all those great things. You can obviously also follow the podcast Twitter account. That's at TNL Podcast, which is a great place to go. And that will have constant updates on our new YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/ThisNintendoLife now, isn't it, MVZ?
It is, yeah.
It is. So make sure to check that out. We've got Let's Plays going of Mega Man 2. We had a particularly fruity episode of Affordable Space Adventures, which was I'd highly recommend checking out. That's a really funny episode. And obviously with the Clone Wars, they continue. So Super Smash Brothers.
You can find me. I'm at Lordnbz on the Twitters, also on the Miiverse. I'm the same. You can find the show in many places. We're on iTunes. We're on Stitcher. We are obviously on YouTube. And, when Google Play decide that the United Kingdom is a country, then yes, that'll happen.
What's going to happen first? Google Play coming to the UK or the NX reveal?
Google Play coming to the UK, Bally. Are you kidding me?
Stupid question.
The NX is never coming out. It's done. All right. That is pretty much us. Bally, any plugs before we fly out of here? The email address again, probably.
Yeah, the email address. We always need more emails. It's thisnintendolife@gmail.com. That's thisnintendolife@gmail.com.
Yeah, I got some good ones recently, so send in some good stuff, and we'll be juiced to read it, because we always like getting some things that get the brains whirring. That's going to be us. Thank you all for listening, sticking with us, and we'll return in a couple of weeks' time with yet another episode of This Nintendo Life. So we'll see you then. Thanks for listening. Goodbye. The musical interludes used on today's episode were a remix of Nate's theme from Uncharted 4, copyright Naughty Dog 2016, and a remix of No Rain in the Desert from The Legend of Zelda, Oracle of Seasons, copyright Nintendo and Capcom 2001.
And then my dad just fucking texts me, like the timing could not be...
Welcome to This Nintendo Live episode 77 part 3. In this exciting episode, we're going to talk about Metroid. Bally, hi, how are you?
Have we started yet?
Yeah, go on.
No, it's not proper.
Bally, this is the episode.
I want a rerun.
No, you don't get a rerun. Welcome to the episode, we're here. Okay, now talk to me about Metroid, why do you like it?
My dad just texted me.
I don't care. You need to talk about Metroid now. Okay, Val, you ready now for fucking Metroid?
Yeah.
Wanna do some fucking Metroid?
Yes.
Right, let's go. 3, 2, 1.
Breakfast.
Welcome back to the breakfast, everyone. My name is NBZ. I'm joined by Breakfast. Hi, Breakfast.
Breakfast.
Today's episode, we're going to talk about breakfast. So, how do you feel about breakfast?
Let's just record the episode.
This is the episode. This is all going.
Have you been outside today?
No, I've gone insane. Hey, Val, you ready?
Yeah.
3, 2, 1.